Imagine, if you will, that on the 29th of March, the UK had in fact left the European Union. In leaving, we would also have left the customs union, the single market, the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and would no longer be bound by the four freedoms of goods, services, capital and labour. This shouldn't have been a controversial aim. This should have been the expected and natural outcome of the result of the referendum of the 23rd of June 2016. Leaving with a deal in which the UK could cherry pick which elements of EU membership it could have and which it could discard always was going to be an extremely unlikely outcome, no matter how much the Remainers might have wanted it. Brexiteers know, as do Remainers if they're honest with themselves, that such a deal would have been absolutely unacceptable to the EU. If we were going to have a deal, we were going to have to take what we were given. To Remainers, membership of the EU is so valuable that it's a deal that they would have taken. Conversely, to Brexiteers, in a mirror image of the EU's position, that would have been unacceptable. And so we're at an impasse, with half the country wanting one thing, whilst the other half want something else. Although it's not exactly an impasse, since the Leavers won the referendum. And the Remainers, in fact, as we all know, lost. But the majority must carry the day. It seems strange that this has to be stated, but considering the relative closeness of the vote and of the far-reaching consequences of the decision, this is perhaps unsurprising. These are not normal times. So this is why I wanted to do this little series on what I expect of the various parties, since there is no precedent. I thought it worth stating that I expected certain behaviours of all the parties involved. The EU was fairly straightforward, since their position is quite clear. What I expected of the British government, however, is more crucial, and out of all the parties has been the most lacking in strategy, in tactics, in their aimless, confused and contradictory approach to the EU, and mostly in their accountability to those to whom they are ultimately beholden, the British people. So to return again to my original premise, imagine that we had left, as intended, as designed and as decided on the 29th of March. What would I expect of those that would have to live with this world-changing decision? What would I expect of the supposed winners in all this? What would I expect of Brexiteers? I expect Brexiteers to remember that this vote, although the most democratic we have ever taken, was in percentage terms really quite close. Brexiteers need not, and indeed must not, give any ground in regard to the democratic legitimacy of the vote, but I do expect them to remember that almost half the country did not get what it wanted. This was not a landslide. Consequently, it is incumbent upon us, as victors, to show an enormous amount of magnanimity to the other side. This is half the country we're talking about. We need to respect their opinions. We need to reassure them that, so long as they respect the outcome, we are here to ensure that we make the very best of our new reality, that we take their concerns seriously, and that we need them to be on side. I expect Brexiteers to be hyper-vigilant that the opportunity for patriotic national renewal that Brexit beckons does not degenerate into something darker, something mean-spirited, or even something revolting like foreigner bashing, ethno-nationalism or outright racism. It is a fair bet that the opposition to Brexit from many Remainers comes as a result of their belief that wishing to leave the EU was, in our case, motivated by xenophobia, racism and fear of the other. I expect Brexiteers to work overtime to demonstrate that this is not the case. I expect Brexiteers to hold the powerful to account. Since we will be leaving the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, a body for which I have a fair amount of respect, we will have one less check on government power. We will still have the European Court of Human Rights as a final arbiter of justice, since the ECHR is not an EU institution, but a reduction in mechanisms designed to be a check on government power must be viewed as the fact that it is, namely that a reduction in checks and balances results in a more powerful and consequently less accountable government. I expect Brexiteers to accept the consequences of their decision. I expect them to be phlegmatic when confronted with the new realities of life outside the EU. Some foreign goods will become more expensive and less readily available, which is the quintessence of supply and demand. It is an inescapable fact that travel will become more tedious and time-consuming. Greater bureaucratic hurdles will be a new fact of life when coming or going to the continent. These will be the costs of Brexit, and we should expect and endure them with patience and good humour. I expect Brexiteers to be realistic of this new paradigm. Brexit will not be plain sailing. It will not be an uninterrupted cruise to the sunlit uplands as promised by some. There will be problems and difficulties ahead, and we must meet those challenges head on. I expect Brexiteers to adopt a realistic optimism. The United Kingdom has weathered greater storms than this. But this optimism, tempered by realism, does have a basis in logic. This market of 65 million souls, and one that European business has for decades referred to as Treasure Island, will not suddenly become a remote backwater. Political determination not to accommodate the UK will give way to pragmatic business interests keen to re-establish the trade status quo. The difference is that now, rather than following an economic model that will always favour Germany and France, we will now be free to turn that to our advantage. I expect Brexiteers to hold their nerve and to weather criticism. Leaving the European Union is an act of considerable magnitude. Symbolically, its effects will be immeasurably larger. If Brexit is achieved, and this latest extension to Halloween is just another attempt to try to find a way to stop it, then from the 31st of October, every reversal, economic or otherwise, will be blamed on Brexit. Every job lost, every increase in prices, every fall in wages, every cancelled order, every contract that might conceivably have been awarded to a British company and wasn't, every drop in investment, every lengthening of NHS waiting times, every rise as well as every fall in house prices, every burglary, every stabbing, every rape, every killing, every riot, every car, train and aeroplane crash, every rise in blood pressure, every infant death, every pensioner who freezes to death with one bar on, every fall in literacy and numeracy, every rise in obesity, anorexia, bulimia or any other eating disorder, every drop in savings, every rise in debt, every drop in social mobility, every rise in incidence of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, as well as any drop in life expectancy and even any rise in the amount of dog shit on the pavement will be blamed on Brexit. So prepare yourselves. In this regard, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Equally, there are again things that I do not expect from Brexiteers. I do not expect Brexiteers to impugn the patriotism of Remainers. This is a cheap trick and one used particularly spitefully by SNP supporters towards any Scot who wanted to remain within the United Kingdom during the run-up to the Scottish independence referendum in 2014. As part of respecting the views of Remainers, I do not expect Brexiteers to resort to this unfair and frankly ignorant tactic. The late Paddy Ashdown, although a fervent Remainer, spent 13 years in the Royal Marines, some of which was in the ultra-specialised and elite SBS, along with many years in the intelligence service. Such service cannot be described as anything other than pure patriotism, and many armchair patriots would do well to remember such things. I do not expect Brexiteers to imagine that putting a cross on a ballot paper to be the sum total of the work required to achieve a successful Brexit. If Brexit is achieved, and in a meaningful way, on the 31st of October, the determined and fanatical efforts to stymie it will not cease. By voting Leave, the British electorate unexpectedly showed a resolve not to be cowed, even as all the organs of the British state, assisted by the virulently anti-British British press, ramped up the pressure to attempt to scare us out of our confidence that we could, in fact, be the masters of our own destiny. Finally, I do not expect Brexiteers, having managed against all odds and in the face of massive and social pressure to comply with the establishment and to acquiesce to the prevailing doctrine of the European superstate, that by upsetting the apple cart of the globalists to believe that our work is done. It isn't, not by a long chalk. By voting Leave, we have demonstrated, perhaps for the first time, in all my lifetime at least, that voting really can change things. Do not let us lose this moment. It will not come again. If we allow our will to be so blatantly disregarded, we shall be sending a powerful signal that we are not, in fact, the owners of our own country, much less our own government. We shall be signalling with perfect clarity that the idea of democracy is nothing more than an illusion, a fiction that we can tell ourselves and teach our children to soothe our consciences as we quietly surrender what's left of our agency and our liberty to the forces of bureaucratic tyranny. We will need to tap into that resolve again and again in the coming months and years. The world is watching. Many would like to see us fall. Some of those most eagerly awaiting our fall and subsequent humiliation, cap in hand to be allowed back into the EU, will sadly be from these very shores. Just imagine the glee with which the BBC, Channel 4 and The Guardian will report on national humiliation. Voting Leave was a slap in the face to them, and it felt good, didn't it? Remember that feeling and savour it. Don't let them have a last laugh, for the stakes couldn't be higher.